All right, today we're doing something a little different. We're going to go on a data-driven journey through nearly 150 years of the Watchtower organization's own writings. We're going to see how it's transformed, not by listening to what others say, but by analyzing the words it chose to use itself. And that brings us to the big question we're tackling here. Can you actually decode an organization's identity, its real priorities, maybe even its soul, just by analyzing its language over time? Let's find out. And when I say data, I mean a ton of it. We are looking at over 30,000 articles, stretching back almost a century and a half. So this isn't about opinions or hearsay. This is a deep dive into their own messaging, straight from the source. So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, I'll explain the how. Then we'll follow the data through 5 different eras of leadership, from the very beginning all the way to today. And then, the fun part, we'll see what all these trends might tell us about the future. Okay, so how are we actually doing this? We're not just counting words. That's too simple. Instead, we're tracking the percentage of articles where key terms pop up. So, for example, if love appears in 50% of the articles, it means that for a period of time, every other article a Jehovah's Witness read had something to say about love. It's a really powerful way to see what they were truly focused on. All right, let's start at the very beginning with the founder, Charles Taze Russell. His era, from 1879 to 1916, really sets the stage. It's our baseline for what this whole movement was supposed to be about. And wow, this chart just lays it all out. Under Russell, these core Christian virtues, faith, hope, and love, weren't just mentioned now and then. Each one showed up in roughly half of all the articles published. Think about that. This was the air they breathed. It was the absolute foundation of the early movement. But here's where it gets really interesting. While the message was overwhelmingly positive, you can see the seeds of control were already being planted. The word Armageddon, almost nowhere to be found, just 3% of articles. But obedience, that was in nearly 44% of them. So, in the beginning, control wasn't about scaring people with the end of the world. It was about getting them to be loyal to Russell's personal interpretations of the Bible. Then, Russell dies. And everything, I mean everything, is about to change. The second president, Joseph F. Rutherford, takes over, and the organization's messaging takes a hard left turn. This is the moment the whole story pivots. And just look at these numbers. It's a seismic shift. Armageddon goes from a fringe idea in 3% of articles to a central theme in 32%. That's more than a 10-fold explosion. Fear is now front and center. And at the exact same time, the word organization more than doubles. Rutherford is building a corporation. And if you want to know what he was thinking, this quote from 1940 spells it out. He's not just a spiritual guide. He calls himself the president and general manager. That's corporate language, not religious language. He was creating a top-down structure with himself at the very top. Now, here's the really clever and kind of manipulative part. Rutherford didn't just swap out love for fear. No, he kept all that positive talk about faith and hope. He basically wrapped the new fear and control messages inside the old comforting language. It was a brilliant way to make a radical shift feel like a natural evolution. So this sets the stage for the next 50 years. This is what we're calling the age of control, where those big spiritual ideas get systematically swapped out for hard and fast institutional rules. Okay, this table is just jaw-dropping. Under the next president, Nathan Knorr, you see what can only be described as the murder of Christian virtue in the publications. Patience drops by over 90%. Goodness, faithfulness, they just vanish. The data clearly shows the focus is no longer on what kind of person you are, but on something else. So what did they talk about instead? Well, rules. Life-altering, devastating rules, like the ban on blood transfusions and the introduction of formal shunning. But here's the strategy. They kept it on the down low. These incredibly important topics appeared in less than 2% of articles. Just enough to make it a rule, but not enough to make people ask too many questions. Okay, moving on to F.W. Franz. His time as president was basically one big damage control operation. The 1975 Armageddon prophecy had failed spectacularly, people were leaving in droves, and he was left to pick up the pieces. And you can literally see him fighting back in the data. When his own nephew, who was on the governing body, left and wrote a book exposing the organization, The word apostate was weaponized. Look at that spike. It became the go-to tool to poison the well, to discredit anyone who dared to criticize them from the inside. And that brings us right up to today, the modern era. And this is where the transformation from a religion to a full-blown corporation really seems to be set in stone, with a whole new set of priorities. So what's the big focus now? Well, the data couldn't be clearer. It's all about money and control. Language related to donations has shot up by almost 1,000% just in the last few years. And at the same time, the threat of being disfellowshipped, of being shunned, is discussed more now than at any other time in their history. And you just have to contrast that with what the founder C.T. Russell said back in 1879. He literally promised they would never beg for money and would rather shut down production than ask for funds. It's a pretty dramatic shift. This points to a really slick, modern strategy. Let's call it vocabulary sanitization. They've gotten rid of the old, harsh-sounding words like obedience. You barely see it anymore. But has the control gone away? Not at all. It's just baked into the system now. The constant threat of shunning does the job without ever having to use the word obey. Okay, so after all that, where does this leave us? What's next? Well, the cool thing is, these trends don't just tell us about the past. They might just give us a sneak peek into the future. Prediction number 1. Birthdays. The data shows that mentions of birthdays in the publications have dropped to practically zero. And we've seen this pattern before. When they stop talking about something, a rule change is often just around the corner. So the prediction is they're going to soften their stance. It may no longer be a reason to get disfellowshipped. And we see a similar, though slower, trend with Christmas. Mentions are way down, and they're steadily declining. It might take longer, but the data suggests that eventually, even the hard line on Christmas could start to fade. So let's just zoom out for a second. We've watched the language of this organization travel all the way from faith, hope, and love to donation, loyalty, and control. It really makes you wonder, right? When the words change that much, has the very soul of the organization changed too?